Rania Alayed, a Syrian woman who had moved to the United Kingdom, lived a life that was both filled with hope and marked by unimaginable pain. Before her tragic end, Rania was a woman who, like many others, dreamed of a peaceful and fulfilling life. Born in Syria, she had a loving family and was full of ambition and vitality. However, her journey would soon be shaped by an abusive relationship, one that would strip her of the joy she once had. Rania met Ahmed Al-Khatib, a man who would later become her husband, and at first, it seemed like the start of a beautiful future. But behind the facade of their relationship, there lurked a darkness that would slowly consume her life. Al-Khatib, whom Rania married, turned out to be abusive, both physically and sexually, and his behavior escalated over the years. Rania, a victim of domestic violence, found herself trapped in a cycle of fear and manipulation, unable to break free due to the control Al-Khatib exerted over her. The abuse was relentless and became a daily nightmare. Despite her suffering, Rania had hope for a better future. She kept trying to find a way to escape her abuser and rebuild her life. This internal strength led her to make the courageous decision to leave her husband and separate from him. It was a brave move, but it was not without consequences. Rania's attempt to leave was met with violent threats and attempts to regain control over her. She wanted to start fresh, to leave behind the horror that had defined her married life, but her past was never truly behind her. Even in her separation, she faced constant harassment and emotional torment. Nonetheless, Rania, with a resilient spirit, began to rebuild her life. She sought refuge, reached out for support, and tried to create a safer future for herself. Rania had finally begun to see a light at the end of the tunnel, but fate would tragically take another turn. Despite her efforts to escape, Al-Khatib, unable to accept the end of the relationship, made the decision to violently end her life. Rania's story is one of strength, resilience, and survival, but it is also a story of the tragic reality that many women face when trying to escape abusive relationships. Rania's courage to leave the abuser and attempt to rebuild her life was a testament to her strength, but it would not save her from the tragic fate that awaited her. Her death, and the disappearance of her body, would become a haunting reminder of the dangers that domestic violence survivors often face even after they escape their abusers. Rania Alayed's life, marked by resilience and determination, tragically ended in the most horrifying of ways. After years of enduring domestic and sexual violence at the hands of her husband, Ahmed Al-Khatib, Rania found the strength to escape. She separated from him, determined to rebuild her life and break free from the oppressive grip of the abusive relationship. This was a significant moment of triumph for Rania, but little did she know that the very act of trying to escape would put her life in even greater danger. Al-Khatib, unable to accept that his control over Rania was slipping away, became desperate and enraged. His obsession with reclaiming the power he had once held over her transformed into a relentless pursuit to exact revenge. This would culminate in the brutal murder of Rania, an act that still haunts those who knew her. In the period after their separation, Rania attempted to rebuild her life with a sense of optimism. She found solace in the support of friends, began working on her own, and sought out resources to help her heal from the psychological scars of her abusive marriage. She had plans, dreams, and a new sense of independence. However, her ex-husband, Al-Khatib, was unwilling to let go. The emotional and physical violence Rania had faced in the past was a pattern that Al-Khatib, a controlling and manipulative man, continued to perpetuate. He could not tolerate the thought of losing control over her, and he saw her decision to leave him as a personal betrayal that demanded retribution. One day, Al-Khatib managed to get in touch with Rania, claiming that he wanted to speak to her and resolve matters amicably. Desperate for closure and possibly hoping for some sense of resolution, Rania agreed to meet with him. This decision would prove to be a fatal one. She was unaware of his true intentions, which were not rooted in reconciliation but in punishment. On the day of their meeting, Rania was last seen alive as she agreed to meet him at a location he had chosen. The details of the exact meeting place remain unclear, but what happened next is a chilling reflection of the extent of Al-Khatib's rage and control over her. In a premeditated act of violence, Al-Khatib abducted Rania when they met. He lured her into a false sense of security, making her believe that they could have a civil conversation, only to overpower her. What followed was an act of brutality fueled by a desire for vengeance and domination. Al-Khatib, armed with his dangerous temper and twisted sense of entitlement, took Rania somewhere remote, away from prying eyes, and there he murdered her. The exact manner of her death is not fully known, but it is widely believed that he strangled or suffocated her. The sheer violence of the act, combined with the coldness in Al-Khatib's decision-making, paints a picture of a man completely consumed by his rage. After committing the murder, Al-Khatib went to extreme lengths to conceal the crime. Rania's body was never recovered, and the authorities were left with very few clues. Al-Khatib's careful attempts to cover his tracks only deepened the mystery surrounding her disappearance. He seemed to anticipate the police's movements, evading detection and leaving a trail of lies and misdirection in his wake. In the days and weeks following Rania's murder, there was no trace of her body, and no one knew what had happened to her. The fact that her body was never found made the case even more chilling. Her disappearance left her loved ones in torment, unsure of whether she was dead or alive. It was as if Rania had vanished into thin air, and the life she had started to rebuild was cruelly taken from her in an instant. Despite his calculated efforts to remain undetected, Al-Khatib's behavior became increasingly erratic. He continued to lie to authorities, friends, and Rania's family, claiming that he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. But as the investigation progressed, suspicions began to grow, and inconsistencies in Al-Khatib's story started to surface. Authorities began to piece together a timeline that revealed Al-Khatib's presence at the location where Rania had last been seen, and they soon began to focus their attention on him. It was only a matter of time before the pieces of the puzzle came together. The investigation into Rania's disappearance eventually led to Al-Khatib's arrest. As detectives unraveled the evidence, they discovered disturbing details about his actions before, during, and after the murder. Text messages between Al-Khatib and Rania showed that he had manipulated and threatened her, and his obsession with her was evident in every communication. His jealousy and need for control were overwhelming, and it became clear that Rania's attempt to escape was the catalyst for his violent actions. Al-Khatib's refusal to let go, his determination to punish her for daring to leave him, and his complete disregard for her life led him down a dark and irreversible path. Once in custody, Al-Khatib denied his involvement in Rania's murder. He claimed that he had no idea what had happened to her, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The police were able to trace his movements and corroborate the testimonies of those who had witnessed his behavior leading up to the crime. Ultimately, Al-Khatib was charged with Rania's murder, though her body was never found. His attempt to cover up the crime failed, and he was arrested and later convicted of her murder. In a bitter twist, the absence of Rania's body left her family with a sense of incompleteness, their grief compounded by the uncertainty of never being able to properly lay her to rest. Rania Alayed's tragic end stands as a stark reminder of the reality of domestic violence, especially in cases where the victim has gathered the courage to leave but is ultimately hunted down by their abuser. Her death serves as an example of the lengths to which some individuals will go to retain control over their victims, and it highlights the dangerous nature of possessive and manipulative relationships. Rania's murder was not just an act of violence, it was the culmination of years of physical and emotional torment, a final act of revenge by a man who could not bear to lose his grip on her. In the aftermath, the case of Rania Alayed has sparked conversations about the dangers of domestic abuse and the importance of offering support and protection to those seeking to escape. Her story is a call for greater awareness and resources for victims of abuse, and it underscores the need for society to recognize the complexities of abusive relationships and the far-reaching consequences of such violence. Despite the tragedy, Rania's memory lives on, a reminder of the strength she showed in trying to escape her abuser, and the brutal reality faced by so many victims of domestic violence around the world. Rania Alayed's tragic end is a stark reminder of the horrors of domestic violence, a powerful narrative of a woman who fought for freedom but, in the end, could not escape the brutal reach of her abuser. Her story is one of resilience, of someone who dared to dream of a better life after years of torment and abuse. It's also a story of immense loss, not only for those who loved her but also for those who knew her bravery and strength. The emotional weight of Rania's death lingers, a heavy reminder of the severity of domestic abuse and the far-reaching consequences it can have on victims, their families, and even the broader society. After years of enduring both physical and psychological abuse at the hands of her husband, Ahmed Al-Khatib, Rania made the life-changing decision to separate. This act alone was a triumph, a statement of strength in the face of unimaginable hardship. But it was also a decision that made her vulnerable to the violence and rage of someone who could not accept losing control over her. Al-Khatib's obsession with dominating and controlling Rania turned into a vengeful mission. His inability to let go of his hold on her became the fatal catalyst for the tragedy that would follow. Even after Rania left, Al-Khatib's violent behavior did not stop. It escalated. He began to stalk her, harass her, and, ultimately, murder her. His actions highlight the extreme danger that victims of abuse often face when they try to break free from toxic, controlling relationships. Rania's story is a tragic illustration of the risk many survivors take when they seek to escape, and it underscores the critical importance of providing support systems for those attempting to rebuild their lives after leaving an abusive partner. Her body was never recovered, leaving her family and friends in a constant state of uncertainty. The knowledge that Rania's life was brutally taken from her, and the fact that her final resting place is unknown, authorities soon discovered the depth of Al-Khatib's involvement in her disappearance. His lies, his denial, and his attempts to cover his tracks only made the case even more chilling. Eventually, justice was served when Al-Khatib was arrested and convicted of Rania's murder. However, the lack of a body left a sense of incompleteness. Her family never had the chance to lay her to rest, and her final moments remain a haunting mystery. This is an aspect of many domestic violence cases that often goes unspoken, the lasting emotional toll on those left behind when closure is never fully achieved. It is a bitter irony that while Rania's murderer was convicted, her family will never have the solace of knowing exactly where she rests. The case of Rania Alayed shines a light on the ongoing struggle of domestic violence victims, especially those who manage to escape abusive relationships, only to face further violence. It is a stark reminder that leaving an abuser does not guarantee safety. In fact, it can often lead to even greater danger. Survivors of domestic violence need support systems that offer not only emotional help but also physical protection. Legal systems, law enforcement, and society as a whole must work to ensure that those who are brave enough to leave an abuser have the necessary resources to stay safe. Rania's story is also an urgent call to action to raise awareness about the prevalence of domestic violence and to provide more resources to victims. While the case of Rania is a tragedy, it is far from unique. Countless women and men experience similar forms of abuse and are often forced to choose between staying in an abusive relationship or facing the very real risk of retaliation and harm when they leave. Rania Alayed's life and death should be a reminder to all of us to continue fighting against abuse, to offer support to survivors, and to ensure that no one has to face such horrors alone. Her story deserves to be remembered, and her memory should inspire action, awareness, and change.